Hi everyone, I'm Joana Filgueiras, and today I'm interviewing my dear friend Kim Chinh about her one-woman show that is called Reclaiming Vietnam. So Kim, thank you so much for letting me interview you. And I'd like for you to just start telling us a little bit about what the show is and where you came up with the idea.
Sure. And thanks for having me. So the show, it's about my experience. It's autobiographical. It's about my experience growing up in a biracial home. My dad is Vietnamese and my mom is white. And I grew up in a house filled with Vietnamese refugees after the Vietnam War. My dad sponsored a lot of his relatives and his brother's children to come and live with us. And so I grew up with this sort of disdain for Vietnamese culture. And I was ashamed of being Vietnamese, and I also felt that they made us kind of like they were different, and so I felt like they called out the fact that I was different because we grew up in a primarily white neighborhood. And I felt very embarrassed of them, of their their haircuts and the way they talked and the way they dressed, and just the fact that they were different. Just felt like I was somehow different because of them.
That's Ernie.
That's my cat. So then a couple. So fast forward many years, I actually ended up going to Vietnam in my mid-20s, and I just loved it there. I had a complete revelation about what it meant to be Vietnamese and who I was and the culture. I felt the people there really embraced me, and I felt such a sense of belonging when I set foot on Vietnamese land. I just felt so connected, almost as if my ancestors were saying, like, welcome back. And I wasn't born in Vietnam, but I really felt a very clear connection to the people and like the country itself.
That's nice. And the show goes a lot into very intense and very personal matters of child abuse, I guess you can say. How did you find the courage to come out and tell your story to a public, not only your family, but whoever is willing to come and see it?
Well, it's been a very long road, and it all started, I guess, in college. I ended up telling a boyfriend when I was 18, and then I saw a therapist at the university where I was going, and she mentioned that they had group therapy for this type of thing, and I had always felt that I was the only one, and I was very alone and very isolated. Um, that like sexual abuse or molestation, like that I was the only person in the whole world that it had happened to, and she helped me to realize that it was something very common, like sadly very common. And anyway, so that's Ernie. He's probably gonna
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, so I started to talk to her about that, and she told me about that there were group therapy, I guess therapy groups in New York. I knew that I wanted to move to New York City when I was a senior in college, and I did end up serendipitously finding one of these groups when I moved to New York City, and ended up really connecting with a lot of that community, and through them and hearing their stories, I gained a lot of perspective. I learned so much about the symptoms and the sort of the mindset that comes along with, with growing up in with that type of abuse happening, just the secrecy and the depression that comes with it, and the shame. And I ended up joining an acting class, and in my acting class, I had gone to Vietnam, and actually, I think it all started when I decided that I wanted to confront my perpetrators, and my acting coach really helped me to decide how to speak to them, and it was really through her that I when I came back to New York, I told her everything that had happened, what had gone on in those conversations, and through that we started to write this show.
And through putting yourself out there and putting yourself, I mean, when you tell your story, you're opening yourself up for judgment and bad or good. You know, people are going to give their ideas and their whatever they think of. Did you find that you needed to be healed before you were able to do that, or did you find that putting the show out there was a process of healing and being able to accept? Would it come first?
Right. Well, I think when I first started to do the show that I thought that I was pretty much healed and that there wasn't very much further for me to go. But as I've done it now, probably like 40 or 50 times, there has been a lot of shifts for me, and it's very different from when I first started to perform. I think my first couple of shows, I just felt so incredibly raw and exposed afterwards. And it was really hard to, it was just kind of, I just felt shame, almost like there's like this backlash of like oversharing. I felt like I had said too much, or I had traumatized my audience, and I felt guilty. And now, now that when I do it, because I've done it for students, like for a couple colleges and several festivals, and it feels very different. It feels like now when I'm doing it, it's more of a service. It's not so much like, here's my story and I'm like spilling my guts and my like all this like secret stuff onto the floor. It feels like I'm telling the story. It's like a very universal story that so many people share, which I know so many people share. And so I think what I'd said about other people's shows is that when I have seen people's shows where they're talking about something that is like really it's very emotional, and their emotions really spill off the stage in a way that feels kind of almost invasive, and it definitely doesn't feel that healed, or it feels like there's some sort of rage.
Is it kind of like begging for people to accept them and that would cure them kind of idea?
Yeah, or almost like in shocking the audience that they will somehow like feel better. And I definitely, like, as an audience member, I didn't find that I felt very safe after those shows. And like I felt very like like I just felt kind of weird and not good. It didn't feel like it was a healthy type of catharsis. So with my show, I was really careful to talk to people about it a lot, and talk to my acting coach and my acting fellows, and workshopped the play a lot to make sure that like the language and the gestures and the way that I was saying things weren't going to come across in a way that would really like trigger the audience or put them into a state of shock. I wanted it to be palatable, but not dumbed down and not like PG-13, but I wanted it to be something that was as harsh as the subject may be, like tasteful and something that would resonate with people and not like turn them off, immediately, as I've seen in some shows. But yeah, so I think my healing process has definitely evolved as I've done the show, and I do feel like now I am in a even more like forgiving state. But I think there's always more healing that can happen, and there's so many levels on which it happens. So I think there's probably more to come.
I find that through my own experience that when you hear other people's stories and people are being honest about what they've been through, it kind of liberates you and gives you the courage to tell your own and kind of face your own fears, right? So do you find that when you share, does the feedback that you get from people are positive in terms of people come to you and say, I've been through this, and it kind of helped them heal as well with your show?
Yeah, that's my favorite part about this show. Like my absolute favorite part is the feedback I get afterwards and like audience interaction. after the show, like recently I did the show about, gosh, I guess like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And after one of the shows in particular, there were like 8 people that wanted to talk to me, and each one of them had their own story, and like thanked me in their own way about just saying, like, it helped them uh, forgive someone, or it helped them like have compassion for themselves. Or there was a woman a few years ago who said, she'd been raped and she carried around this very heavy shame for many years until she saw my show, and then started to figure out that it wasn't her fault, and it lessened her burden a little bit. And I felt so grateful to hear her talk to me about that. And there have been many people that I've stayed in contact with and had coffee with and met up with, and just like talked about their experience. And yeah, and I think in any type of show that has to do with like personal healing, it's such an amazing and rewarding thing to be able to connect with your audience on such a deep level. And some of the student shows that I've gone to, I've gotten these little notes afterwards, and I keep those notes,
That's nice.
and they've said, just like thank you, or I share a similar story. And it's just like that part is really healing for me, to talk to people about their experience, and to know that I'm helping them to talk more about this shame, and to somehow, slowly unburden themselves from that shame.
That's really nice, yeah. And do you find it harder or easier to perform when you have people that you connect to in the audience?
Yeah, good question. Well, I thought that it would be way easier to perform in front of an audience of people that I know, love, and support me. But in fact, the opposite has been true for me. It's really when I'm in an audience where I know no one, I have no, like, I don't have any clue who's in the audience, and I don't recognize anybody, that I just feel so much freer in terms of my connection, my vulnerability. And I've figured out that when I have friends or family, or people or relatives, yeah, in the audience, that there's a part of me that's sort of trying to protect them, and I don't want to be too vulnerable, or too, I don't want to show too much emotion, because I somehow, like, I'm trying to protect them from my feelings. And it doesn't serve me because I'm not as well connected as I could be. But I haven't quite figured out how to get over that hurdle of, there's like this filter that sort of pops up. It's interesting because a lot of times I find when I'm not as connected to my vulnerability, to like my grief, or some of my sadness, then and it ends up coming out as anger. Like all of it comes out as, like, I just find I'm yelling more. Like nervousness comes out in like more, it comes out as louder, more angry. It's like anger is way more, it feels safer to connect to than fear or
Sure.
sadness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. So what would you say to people who have gone through traumas in their lives, maybe similar to yours or not, but who carry this resentment? I feel by watching your show and knowing you that you have gone through a lot of forgiveness. And what advice would you give people to be able to go through that and release all this weight from their shoulders and have a happier, better life?
I would say that, no matter what our past has been, all of us have had some sort of trauma. I mean, life is just, it's not, it's usually not so sunny and easy even from the get-go, that there are a lot of things that happen to us when we're children, when we are in this vulnerable state, that stay with us into adulthood. So I think the thing that I think is the most important in terms of like healing is to not minimize the things that have happened to us, and to not tell ourselves like, oh, it was so long ago, and it really doesn't matter anymore, I should just let it go, I should get over it, I'm strong, everything's fine, I'm okay, it didn't affect me. Like all these things, I think, are they're a way that we cut off a part of ourselves. That there's, if you believe in like inner children, that there's this voice inside that's like asking to be heard. And when we don't stop and tune in and ask, like, okay, what's happening, or what's going on, or what do you want to say, that we're cutting off from like our own compassion, not just for ourselves, but for other people. I think that you can only have as much compassion for others as you can cultivate for yourself. So, you know, in trying to connect to what happened a long time ago, and to talk about it and to bring it out, you know, maybe it's like something that you bring up to someone who hurt you a long time ago. You know, even if it's just to say, like, this is what happened and this is how it affected me, to just say it and to not sweep it under the rug and pretend it didn't happen, and to just say, like, oh, well, you know, I'm a strong person and that didn't affect me. But to acknowledge it, and then, you know, and then from there be able to move on, but from a place of like acceptance and honesty. I think that that's a really important thing for us to do, that many of us, you know, we don't want to remember or connect to, but I think it is important to be able to allow ourselves to remember and to feel all the feelings that we weren't able to feel as children.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is kind of like honor your history and acknowledge it instead of just ignoring it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this is beautiful. And I love that I was finally able to interview you about this. And I'd love to put more information on the video about your calendar, where you're going to be playing, and how people can contact you if they want to bring you to the universities or shows, or, you know, to be able to expose more of this beautiful work. I still hope this will become a movie one day.
Oh. Thanks
So
for
thank
having
you
me.
so much.
Thanks, Joanna.
No more secrets. No more secrets. What does that even mean? And we're off, riding down the road with hundreds of other motorists. They pull the bike off of me. Kim, these were just playful things we did. It was just kids' games. I'm not Vietnamese, I'm American. Broken. I'm officially broken. You know, I thought it would be nice for you to see some relatives you haven't seen in a very long time. I screech and yell! I scratch them! I pull their hair! I've never felt any anger for what happened. Is this how I'm supposed to feel? Tell them. I've won! Haven't I?